In this lesson, we'll talk about transforming our models. So when you hear transforming your models, all we're really talking about is moving, scaling, or rotating your models within your 3D scene. Let's take a look at this by importing some chairs to put into our kitchen scene. So we'll go to File, and let's import those chairs. So we'll just import the chair.ma. And you can see that we've imported it, but we don't really know where it is. And so we can go to wireframe if we want to look at that. And you can see that it's actually down there. We can also go into our outliner and select the chair. And you can see it selected there. Okay, so we want to move that into position because obviously that's not really where we want our chair. So we want to make sure that we're in object mode. Now object mode is going to be signified by this icon up here. And the difference is between object mode, we can also go to component mode. And we'll talk about component mode actually in the next lesson, but that's where we can get down and work on the inner structure of our models. Object mode is just going to allow us to take our model as a whole and move it around. So we're in object mode, and if you're not, you can go ahead and just click that icon, or you can hit F8 on your keyboard to toggle back to object mode, and you can see that we have our transform values over here in the channel box. So we want to actually be able to move this and rotate it around. Right now there are no values associated, so it's brought in with no transform values at all, except you can see on the scale, it's actually 1. So the scale of 1 means it's full size. Anything below 1, you're going to be taking it down in size. And then anything over 1, you're going to be obviously increasing the size. And then these rotate values are angle values. And the translate values are unit values here in Maya. Okay, they're based on the 3 axes, X, Y, and Z. And so you have X, Y, and Z translate, rotate, and scale. Okay, so we want to be able to move. So to move, we can go ahead and either choose the move tool, or we can hit W on our keyboard, and that brings up our manipulator. And you can see that we have 3 arrows here. The green arrow is Y, Z, and X, and so we'll take the green arrow and pull it up in space, and here we can see our chair. Now as we've pulled that up, you can see that the translate Y value has actually changed, so we can see how far we've actually moved that. You can see how that updates. Okay, you can actually put in numbers here if you want and actually manually move that around. You can also select translate Y and with your middle mouse move that up and down as well. So there are different ways of moving this. So we'll move this over in the Z. Let's move it back down in the Y. Move it over in the X, and we'll get it kind of close to the table that we have here. Okay, so you can see all of those values are being kept track of here in the channel box for a translation. Okay, and that's basically just moving when you hear translation. Now we'd like to rotate this. So we have rotate values. To actually go to the rotate tool, we can click on this button, or we can choose E on our keyboard, and that will bring up another manipulator. So again, we've got a green ring, a red ring, and a blue ring. And then we have this yellow ring, which is basically just based on the camera view. So we know we want to rotate it around in the Y, or in the green. So we can select that green ring and just rotate it in the Y. If we were to select anything inside here and start to click and drag, you can see I can rotate that on all axes at the same time, and you can see those values change. If you happen to do that, but you don't want those values in there, you can always zero those out. Well, so we know that we only want the value on the Y, so we'll go into rotate X, zero that value out. Same thing with the Z, and now you can see it's nice and flat on the floor. Okay, and we can modify those values in here. If we'd like to scale it up, we can do that here. Scaling in the X, we'll stretch it because it's only scaling on one axis. Same thing with if we just scale it on the Y. So typically, if you want to maintain the proportions, you're going to be scaling uniformly across X, Y, and Z, unless you want to make it a little bit thinner or change the proportions, in which case you can scale only in 1 or 2 of the different axes. Okay, so now we have values associated with our transforms. If we want to set that back to where it was when we imported it, we could zero out all of these. So just clicking and selecting all of these and setting those to 0. What we can also do is set the values themselves to 0 without moving the object. So if we want to say, okay, this is the new default position for this, and I actually want this to be 0 as far as our channel box is concerned, we can go up to Modify, Freeze Transformations. Now by choosing Freeze Transformations, all of those values are zeroed out, but the model hasn't moved. So this is its new 0 location. So that's something to be aware of. Many times you'll want to keep those transform values in here, but there are times when you'll want to freeze those as well. Okay, now as we move and rotate and scale these, you'll notice it's based on a particular point. So in this case, it's based on a point that is sort of up here in the middle of this. We can actually move that pivot point around to another location. So for instance, if we rotate this chair around, it's actually rotating from the top. And if we scale it, it's actually scaling from this point as well. So if we were to go ahead and take the pivot point, and we can hit Insert on our keyboard, and you can see how this changes. And we can actually move this pivot point down. So let's move it down towards the bottom of the chair. We'll hit Insert again, and that brings that back so that we now have the model in object mode with a new pivot point. So now if we go to Scale, you can see it's actually staying on the floor because that's where the pivot point is, and it's scaling from there. So that makes it a little bit easier. We don't have to go in and scale and then replace everything as it was. Okay, so you can move the pivot point around from which all of your transforms happen. Now, if you'd like to real quickly just get your pivot point into the center of your object, we can go to Modify Center Pivot, and that will pop that pivot point back to the center point. Okay, so there are ways to move your pivot point around and to get it into a position where you'd like. Now, if you want to go ahead and take that scale back to 1, we can select those values in our channel box and set those to 1. Okay, so we'll go ahead and let's just bring in another chair, or you can just duplicate the one that you've got there. Okay, again, we've got the chair that we can select here. We'll go ahead and move it into position. Okay, it's floating off of the floor, so we want to just translate it down until it's right above the floor, and you can see it start to penetrate. Toggle through to our Rotate tool and just move this into position. And again, if you select the center here, we can rotate or move these rather in all axes. But if we select the arrows themselves, we can isolate that to a specific axis. Okay, so those are some of the methods that we can use for transforming our geometry. So translating, which is moving, and then rotating and scaling the pieces of geometry that we create so that we can create our finished scenes. Okay, so the next thing that we want to talk about is going to be getting down into the components of our 3D model. So the pieces that make up those models that we talked about. So we'll talk about those in the next lesson.